Good afternoon. Good evening. I guess it's not afternoon, it's evening, right? So, good evening, everybody. I wanted to come and do part two about our last episode um, concerning the rewatch of Ukraine and looking at it through the lens of now, right? How does it affect the freedman community? What impact does it have on us? What does it mean for us going forward? And how have things that we predicted played out? What, you know? So I've added a couple more clips. I'm going to end up chopping up that first video and take some parts out to try to make those clips available so that people can see some of the, I think the more, I don't know, informative parts, maybe just alone. But one of the first videos, I want to touch on something I covered in the first part, but that I feel like I've seen two videos now in the recent days that have given a greater context to what I was talking about. So I know a lot of you have heard about the situation going on in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so I'm not going to be getting into that really any significant way today. I think that's something that maybe me and the brothers can kind of hash out together. So I want to try to get them back before I do anything like that. But I do want to talk about some of the context of that situation and how it kind of fits along the lines of what we're doing and what we deal with and what I said previous. So what I'm going to do is I want to play the clip from the video last part one, and then I'll show the context to try to give a better explanation of what I was trying to say, because I think these two individuals said a lot more fluidly than I did. So here we go.
The voices of dissenting opinion. How's the black man in America, how is the freedman in America going to find justice in this world when at any moment America can call the dogs and the dogs will come howling? You think you're going to get to vote reparations in? You think you're going to march reparations in? You think you're going to sit in reparations in? And it's not going to work. I had a revelation a couple weeks ago, and this is what I learned. Tell me if I'm off base.
Now, this is the specific, what I'm about to say is the specific point that I'm going to be talking about just briefly.
Fellas, tell me if I'm off base. But what do we value in Martin Luther King and Malcolm X? What do we value in Medgar Evers? What do we value? They were willing to give their lives up for the people. The Black Panthers were willing to die for what they believed in. Correct? Right or wrong?
That's the focus.
But what do the people we fighting against value? They value that at any moment they will take your life and won't think twice about it. So our values is off because we fighting against people who don't give a shit about us, and we willing to give up our lives. We're never going to get nowhere. Now, I'm not telling you to go get no gun and no nothing. But what I want you to know is you fighting a losing game.
So wait a minute.
That you want to fight against want your life. And the people that you look up to taught you to give your life away. And that's not how you win.
Okay, so I'm going to play first a show called The Duran. And The Duran is a show hosted by Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou, both Greek. One is like, I think, Greek American, and he lives in Cyprus. The other is like British Greek, lives in the UK. Alex Christoforou was a former, or he's not a former, he's a CEO of, I'm not sure, some kind of tech company. And Alexander Mercouris is a lawyer in the UK. And they're talking to Jeffrey Sachs. Now, Jeffrey Sachs, just so I can be sure that I have pertinent information, I know he was a professor But let's see, Jeffrey Sachs, so we can get a full understanding of who he is an American economist, academic, public policy analyst, and former director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, where he holds the title of university professor. He is known for his work on sustainable development, economic development, and the fight to end poverty. Okay, so that's just the briefest of introductions to who he is. So I'm going to pull up the clip from the Duran, and I want you to hear what he says about peace, right? Because I spoke about this, and it kind of, I feel like it got a little bit of pushback from my brothers, and I think it had to do with my delivery more so than my message. But I think this illustrates what I meant, right? When I talk about our fight for justice for ourselves.
I don't think that the American presidents ever seriously.
Let me give more context. So they're speaking about the situation in Israel, and they're speaking about the two-state solution or some way toward peace, right? So he's trying to explain that there has been no American president, at least administration, at least in modern times, who has been sincerely interested in trying to find peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And this is what he says about that.
Took that on, and I don't think any Israeli government, except for one, except for Yitzhak Rabin, took that on, and he was assassinated in trying to make peace. And that's another major lesson in the world. It's much easier to derange peace than to make it, because those who oppose peace kill those who want peace. This is actually, unfortunately, throughout history, a pretty widely observed phenomenon. So most of the Israeli governments didn't really.
So I want to just play that one more time, just so we can hear that again.
Took that on, and I don't think any Israeli government, except for one, except for Yitzhak Rabin, took that on, and he was assassinated in trying to make peace. And that's another major lesson in the world. It's much easier to derange peace than to make it, because those who oppose peace kill those who want peace. This is actually.
Okay, so he says the only Jewish president who wanted peace was Yitzhak Rabin, and they killed him. He was assassinated. And they say he was assassinated because it's easier to derange peace than it is to promote peace. He said because the people who want peace, the people who don't want peace will murder those who do. And so that is, along the lines of what I was trying to say. We're fighting because we're willing to give our lives up. We revere individuals who are willing to die for the cause, nonviolent action, civil disobedience. But that doesn't fit within the framework of the enemy we're fighting anymore. Okay. And so this is Yitzhak Rabin. He was killed in 1995, fifth prime minister of Israel. And let's see who assassinated him, just so we can get an idea of who assassinated him. It says Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amir, a right-wing extremist who opposed the signing of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords are a pair of agreements between Israel and Palestine Liberation Organization. Okay. And so Yigal Amir was a Israeli right-wing extremist who assassinated incumbent prime minister, right? And so this is the ultimate message, right? But then we have Irami Osei Frimpong, the funky academic, who has a video that will give me a little bit more context to explain what I mean when I say that the people we're fighting against would have us, they would prefer it if we fought nonviolently. They would prefer, and I'm not
America, my name is
advocating for
Andrew. I said
violence.
from Pong, I come to you live.
But what happens is when we lose sight of the fact that the tactics and methods that we may be employing in this modern era for our fight for freedom, justice, and equality may be anachronistic. We have to try to make a new tactic. So here is him speaking about Israel and Palestine and giving a very similar appraisal, right? Because he says he doesn't have a nonviolent solution for the Palestinians to find peace and freedom.
Since I don't have a path forward that is nonviolent, I'm not going to second guess what Hamas does in the name of violence. Because look, one of the purposes of nonviolent civil disobedience is to show the degradation of your oppressors, right? Nonviolent civil disobedience doesn't work when people just want you dead. Like a lot of Zionists would be happy if everyone just miraculously died in Gaza. They just kind of disappeared, right? They're not particularly useful to the economy in that way, in the same way that, for example, Black people were useful to the economy in the American South, or Hindus and Indians were useful to the economy in India. It's not that kind of shutdown when nonviolence can work. There's no boycott that will actually help the case. There's no boycott that will force a quality of violence that will show the disproportionate violence and the inhumanity that you're being subject to. And that's the point of nonviolent resistance. You're trying to provoke the quality of violence to show that, no, the people who are trying to kill us really do think that they're humans. We're inhuman, right? And you can't do that with nonviolence in Gaza, but you might be able to do that with violence, right? So you do a little bit of ridiculous violence or a little bit of horrendous violence, and then they come back leveling hospitals. They can no longer say well, you're killing children and women, and you.
And so there's another. Let me bring my. There is another clip of his that I want to play briefly, but that illustrates the point I was trying to make. We have a group of people who, when you look at the history of white supremacy or the system of white supremacy in this country, and I was telling my father this yesterday, freedmen and Native American, but freedmen, because this is the Freedmen's Collective, are the only group of people in this country who can hold up the mirror to the system of white supremacy that exists here. Our existence is the proof of the lie that they have told all the way up until today of America being a white country, of the all-American boy and all-American girl being blonde hair, blue-eyed, slim, and tall, and white-skinned, right? Because we have been here from the beginning. And so if we continue to be willing to sacrifice ourselves in this way, what we are doing is allowing them to eradicate us, and in so doing, eradicate the memory of us, the reality of the world as it is, and not as they have portrayed it to be for hundreds of years. When you look at the snapshots of TV shows throughout history, when you look at pictures of the past of America and the suburbs and Leave It to Beaver, you see a time that has never existed for the Black man in America. Our time has always been hell and torment. But our existence is the proof. James Baldwin spoke about that dichotomy a lot. The relationship between the white man and the black man in America. How we are already an interracial group because by no choice of our own, we have been mixed together. We have been forced to live together. Du Bois talks about it. That, you know, it would be better for the white establishment, I'm paraphrasing, if we no longer existed. Because our existence is a reminder of the truth. Everything that America stands on is a lie. Land of the free, home of the brave. Be whatever you want to be, hard work, whatever, meritocracy. Countless instance after instance of freedmen existence in this country has disproven that. But it is only through our existence and continued existence that we can show and hold up that mirror and say, no, this is who you are. This is the monster you are. We are the scars. We bear the scars of you. You don't get to go around the world and be a hero and pass out funds and pass out aid because your people here at home are being destroyed by you. And so I want to play another clip that talks about the ways in which the Palestinian situation and the Israeli situation links up with how our condition in this country fits. It's from Army, so I'm going to pull it up now.
About people in the area that's known as the Gaza Strip. And the problem is those Palestinians are not allowed to really do anything, because it turns out that if you give people who you've stolen their land and livelihood access to doing anything, one of the things they're going to do is figure out how to get their land and livelihood back and probably take it back with force. You moved them out with force, they're going to try to take it back with force. So you have blockades, you have sieges, because they're trying to keep 2 million people from actually building anything, because one of the things that those people will also build is the means to get their land back. And this all happened in 47. 47 is not that long. That's the year my mom was born.
And so that is another reason why the freedmen in this country are in the condition that we are in. We're kept in this, as I spoke about in the previous video, a retarded state of existence, where you look around and our communities are run down and horrible. Our institutions, high schools, colleges are underfunded, insufficient. Why is that? Because what Army just said, and I encourage everybody to go look at that video. It's his most recent video on the Funky Academic. What he says is, when you give people the means of self-determination, what they will do ultimately is fight for what is theirs. And so long as you keep people oppressed and depressed and repressed and suppressed, they'll never have the opportunity to think of greater things. When you have people living hand to mouth, when you have people trying to figure out from day to day how they will survive, they never have the opportunity to spend brain power on better, bigger things, on achieving greater things. And so whenever we have situations where we're trying to figure out as a group, why are we like this? Why can't our community seem to get it together? Never you forget that it is the intention and the plan of those in the power establishment to keep us in this position, because they understand whether or not we have the numerical possibility of success, that it is likely that with that power and stability, we would attempt to take back everything that is ours, everything that is owed to us. So that is the context that I wanted to give to that specific portion of our show. Because I think the way that I worded it previous to this did not allow for the gravity of what I was saying to be heard. Because, you know, I was probably speaking more loudly than was necessary, but I can be passionate. And I was speaking more fiercely than maybe would have allowed others, even my panel mates, my brothers, to hear me clearly. And so now we can go back to the video, right? Because I found out where we were. So finding out where we were, we're going to go back and watch speaking about the situation in Ukraine and the ways in which the people there treated those immigrants, Black, African immigrants, Indian immigrants.
Yeah. I was going to say, Stead, I think you was on point.
I have to find the timestamp. So forgive me. Give me one moment.
Pertinent to my people. And so, like, honestly, you know, from a global perspective, yes, we're going to denounce white supremacy anywhere we see it. But at the same time, from a political perspective and what that means for me locally here in America, it doesn't mean I'm out here to just champion the cause of the Ukrainian Africans. Like, that's not my fight. And that's,
I posted that.
You got to start understanding.
I posted that clip of the reporters talking about all the refugees crying because they got blonde hair and blue eyes, and how this is devastating because this ain't some third world hellhole. Honestly, and it's just like, you know, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. I think it's the #1 most corrupt country in Europe. I would have went to
I think I
Bulgaria.
did read that they have some corruption issues over there.
Yeah, I'd have went to Bulgaria first.
You know,
I'd have went to Romania first. You know what I'm saying? Like,
another issue
I ain't
I
never want to
did
go to
want
none
to
of
point
them
out.
countries, bro.
Another issue I did want to point out. I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, but the corporations that I work for, affiliated with, they have been having calls that we stand with Ukraine and how you can support the Ukrainian refugees, and the DNI is taking these initiatives to focus on, you know, providing inclusion to people who could be marginalized through war efforts and shit like that. So I feel like if a corporation could take those steps, then I could definitely bring up reparations as a political topic to any, to any organization, because at this point, you're involving yourself as an entity into political affairs that shit your company isn't responsible for. So
you know what? That's a very good point.
If that's your opinion, then locally you should have more focus or more worry for the American freedmen and the history that we do share as countrymen.
That part right there.
The Ukrainian people. So that this is something that I've seen, and I feel like if I have to talk to my Black network, I might have to bring that up. But we'll see how far that gets us.
That's a good point, though. Like that has been the most amazing response that I've seen, is all these Western companies pulling out of Russia or shutting down operations left and right. Just like, it's almost like they've fallen in line, but they didn't even go this hard with Black Lives Matter.
Well,
they ain't even go half as hard for Black Lives Matter. You know, Black Lives Matter on its face as an idea is cool. The organization is absolute trash can operation, but Black Lives Matter didn't get this type of energy. Now, with all these Western companies pulling out of Russia, what I also perceive as potential for the future is that if they don't pull back, if these companies don't reinstate operations or go back relatively soon after at least a ceasefire, after it calms down, what it will do is it'll drive the Russian people into more of a separatist mindset from the West, and it'll increase global hostility because they'll feel excluded long after the war. And yes, there's going to be a lot of.
So this is interesting because Brother Darvell basically hit the nail on the head correctly. the U.S. attempted to use sanctions and all these types of market manipulations to pull the Russian economy down. And what it has resulted in instead is our own economies declining. And for as long as we've been in this country, whatever happens to the economy at large is magnified double for our community, right? What you see at the gas pump, at the grocery store, the inflation is double digits in America and in the West. And the Russian people have gotten stronger because they have come together. These businesses have been overtaken by various Russian entities. And so that has allowed them to stabilize their economies because Russian money is staying in Russia. We always hear about this globalist idea of money moving around the world. But we don't see, or we're never explained, how that affects us and the type of jobs we work, factory jobs. Because right now, you know, here, the big three, they're having strikes, various strikes at different plants. How programs like NAFTA and the TPP, right, have affected our jobs and our ability to sustain a living for our families because they've taken low skill, high wage jobs and moved them to Mexico or somewhere else in order that they might be able to undercut their workers here in America. But when a country looks out for its own citizens and for the benefit of its citizenship, like Russia has done and is doing, you can see that there can be success and stability. America, as a country, works to cannibalize its citizenship, right? It seeks to cannibalize itself. The corporations and those wealthy individuals steal resources and opportunity and time and labor. And when they're finished, they'll leave. They'll move somewhere else to attack the next viable option.
Building that Russia has to do in that country. But
Make them
the
do what they
idea that
say.
all these services and things that these people may have been interested in or using, especially like I heard Netflix shut their stuff down over there. These people are like, okay, so that's how you really feel about us, the people who had no idea this was going on. They're gonna like bet. Then they're gonna come up with their Russian alternatives. They're gonna get with the Chinese. They're gonna use Chinese networks, just like they switched the Union Pay in favor of the MasterCard and Visa systems to do a global business. And they're going to start to increase this level of hostility. And it's going to move from just that Putin level down to more and more of the commoners. Because, you know, I don't know that they can ever clean this up because I don't see Netflix and Pepsi and McDonald's just turning the light switch back on like that. Because then that would show explicitly kind of how opportunist their activity was.
Well, see, but that was my point. And then kind of say what y'all say, because I kept forgetting to bring this up. But like I've already told y'all, I don't mess with Florida, nothing. Florida oranges, Florida orange juice, nothing. I don't do none of that, right?
Right.
I don't go to Florida no more, none of that. Because Florida, since 1972, when the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was constitutional, the state of Florida has not given a death penalty to a white person for killing a black person. They've never done it since 1972. And they have never done it. So I don't go to Florida at all. My mother-in-law live in Florida.
Have they killed black people since 72? Have they killed black people for killing white people?
Yeah. Florida give you the chair quick. Florida and Texas, them two places that you want the chair, you're going to get it in Florida and Texas. But you didn't see this. Like you saying, you didn't even got to say Black Lives Matter. Understanding that police killed unarmed people. Understanding George Zimmerman wasn't even a police officer. And he killed somebody, unarmed, a child. And none of these places saw fit to put no pressure on nobody. You got motherfuckers pouring out vodka for this. You don't even know what's going on. And nobody, you ain't willing to stop going to South Beach? You ain't willing to stop buying oranges from Florida? Go buy Sunkist oranges? You ain't willing to do something. I don't go to Walmart. I don't shop at Walmart. I ain't shopped at Walmart since John Crawford III got killed in a Walmart for carrying around an airsoft gun that they sell in Walmart, and Walmart didn't say shit about that. Right? In Ohio, right?
Yeah, that was, I think. So
you
listen.
have all these organizations showing you they don't give a shit about us.
So they don't give any crap about us, and neither do the Ukrainians apparently. But I don't think everybody's naive to that who's over there. To the point, I want to show a video clip of a little interview here with my mans. I want to show y'all if y'all ain't seen this yet. I'm gonna go ahead and get it playing, and we're gonna watch this one.
High Commissioner for Refugees is now confirming to us that there are cases of discrimination in admitting refugees. One Congo native saying he was discriminated against while trying to board a train out of Ukraine. Take a listen.
They even told us, like, we are going to give you guns and you're going to fight for Ukraine. I said, hi, we're going to fight for Ukraine? We are not Ukrainian. We are black. So how can we fight? How can we fight for Ukraine? If we fight for Ukraine, we are going to die first because we are black. One day we see, oh, look at those black people. I think they are from NATO. So we have to kill them first. So how could they think that way? Come on. Ukraine.
He said, I ain't even fighting for Congo. You think I'm about to fight for Ukraine? Like Tariq be saying. It wasn't popping. He had to flee.
This is the crazy part. He said, we ain't Ukrainian, we black, but he want the Ukrainian rights that they're affording to their citizens. That's the crazy part.
He wanted that.
If this is America and we had an invasion at home.
Now I spoke in the last stream about the issue of Nazism in Ukraine and how it's haven for neo-Nazism. So I'm going to speak about that more in this video. I've got some more information. I'm going to be speaking about Canada. But this is, again, what we have to understand. The Buffalo shooter, who I spoke about, we speak about in this original video, utilize the same ideology in the Ukraine. And so we find our government is funding these individuals. We find that our government is giving these individuals the opportunity to fight a war with our taxpayer money or not, wherever the money is coming from. Give it to us.
I really can't, hear the argument that, you know what I'm saying, you're not an American citizen, you're just black. Like, that's not going to happen for us.
Well, I mean, if they had an invasion, I wouldn't even be fighting.
But now at the same time, they rightfully justify with all of the racist shit going on. Like, ain't no way I'm going to openly serve unless they forced that AK in my hand. We had to go down the street.
You put an AK in my hand, I might turn it on you, so don't even play.
But no, that dude, he killed me. Like, he's just like Ukraine. Like,
he got a point too.
He's like, I love his point, Ernest. His point was dead on. Like, they see him. Like, why is there a black dude with a gun? Oh, he must be that NATO here. First thing, they shoot him. Then second thing, they call Putin. Then Putin dropping bombs in the wrong place, and it's a wrap.
But I mean, why is you there? Why is you there, bro?
Back to that.
You see what I'm saying? Go back to Congo, bro. Get it popping.
No,
fight in Congo. Get it popping, bro.
No, so the funny thing that you say that's dead is that it's actually a lot of Africans who on the continent that while this whole issue has been going on with Africans in the Ukraine. There's been Africans who've been saying that NATO, the EU, and the African Union, while they all focused on the efforts that's going on in the Ukraine, they refuse to look at current conflicts in Mozambique. I think it wasn't Congo, but it was Mozambique. Shit, I got to think of the country.
And now we understand Niger kicked France out. And so the U.S. is preparing some sort of invasion with France, the West. They're trying to use ECOWAS, which is, I believe it's the Economic Community of West African States, to force Niger to allow its it's essentially a lapdog to France back in power. They're threatening to invade, right? There's a delegation of African countries, UN allies, spearheaded by Kenya, that is preparing to invade Haiti at any moment, right? So we see how these lapdogs exist even in Africa, where they do the bidding of the West. I believe a statistic I heard on a video, an individual said that 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 light bulbs in France is powered by uranium, from in their nuclear facilities, that is derived from Niger. And they're paying Niger pennies on the dollar for uranium. And so, in the grand scheme of things, one might think 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 is not a lot. But anybody, it's dark here where I am, but go outside and imagine 1/5 of every house on your block or in your neighborhood is out. That is the significance. 1/6 or 1/5 of every house on your street has no power. See, we continue to have these issues because at every instance in that chain, there is somebody who is weak and willing to concede for greed to the evil. And like Jeffrey Sachs said, it is easier to derange peace than it is to promote peace, because those who would derange peace will kill those who promote it. And like Irony said, it is necessary for this confusion. If Africa could be whole and competent, if Africa could manage its own resources, enrich its own uranium, and build its own military, mine its own gold and diamonds and precious metals, what type of power could it be, and what type of revenge would it seek? The system of white supremacy is now, as it ever has been, motivated by fear. But it is a fear of things, it's a fear of consequences for actions that it has undertaken for hundreds of years on the world. It is why you see in India, there's a continuous cycle of inadequacy and inefficiency. It is why you see in Africa. It is why in the Caribbean. It is why in South America. And at any moment when there's an opportunity for someone to come who might offer even a glimpse of stability, they will interject. The same way J. Edgar Hoover spoke about the Black Messiah, and they killed Fred Hampton, and they killed Martin Luther King, and they killed Malcolm X. They understand that if a powerful figure can stand up and galvanize these vast groups of people to come together to form a coalition, you could overturn this system. You can, in theory, create something more just. And that doesn't benefit the powerful.
That I had, but there was 2 other countries that they mentioned. Yeah, you said Burundi was one, but there was another one too, Cameroon. So those 3 countries, they actually got these protesters who are doing hashtag Africa, they're doing hashtag African, hashtag Ukraine, but they put in the issues that are domestic to Africa or their lands, the issues that are going on every day, to bring social awareness to that, because that's not being talked about. What we are focused on, though, is this injustice that's going on with these immigrants and these white folks. So, I found that interesting that, they took that chance to uplift the issues that they find important, which is similar to what Black Americans must do in this moment.
Shoot.
And see, this is the thing, though. We keep getting stuck on these people trying to say, Black, like I listen to Tariq, he do these Twitter spaces, and he talked to these different, so they and it's just like, but y'all keep leaving. We're no Black Americans is leaving America. We fighting. We all here fighting.
Yeah.
Y'all all leaving.
We leave for other we go away for little vacations to make money, like our WNBA stars. We got one stuck in Russia right now.
Yeah, she.
What?
She crazy, bro.
Wait a minute. What happened? What?
You want to bring that hash oil over there?
Yeah. So I really was kind of like, that off
She
the
a
jump,
fool, man.
Off the jump, I'm like, yeah,
I think I'm going to try to
you
fast
did
forward
break the
this
law.
part
I'm
just
pretty
so I
sure.
can
Something,
Yeah, you a
something
dummy, bro.
more about it.
topic.
You gonna go to a country and
I mean, I don't know if it's the same.
Oh, it's time for this one.
Well, but anyway.
ran
I'm
for
gonna
president.
put it in
won.
there right now. I'm gonna put
That
it
was
up on
part of the
YouTube.
plot of the show, and then he actually did it in real life.
And then,
Bro,
well,
he-
yeah, I mean, yeah.
Oh man, that's crazy, dude.
Justified the invasion of Ukraine is this idea of denazification. So he's approachable and relatable.
Let's see, this
He's
might be
filming
a little
himself in
bit better.
selfie mode on the streets of approachable.
Tom Cruise. That's why he talking so much shit. He probably ain't even in Ukraine no more. I sent y'all a new article where he said he's willing to negotiate the eastern region of Ukraine right now, and a stalemate or some shit.
Well, we found out that he wasn't there, or he's been using green screens and all this other stuff. So that was accurate. He wasn't there as he presented himself to be. But now we're going to get into some more topics. So I'm going to let this play a little longer.
I mean, that's in their best interest. That's in their best interest to do so. Which
He's
I mean,
cool on joining NATO. That's what it said. He's cool on joining NATO, and he's willing to negotiate on Eastern Ukraine, because they really gonna just need to split the country up in half. Western Ukraine gonna need to be a Nazi country, and Eastern Ukraine gonna have to be Russian.
Right. Yeah. And
I
then
just
like
put it in there, Darville, in the chat.
Okay,
another thing that I learned about you, so of course the media is saying, well, of course Ukraine isn't Nazi affiliated. Zelensky's a Jew, and it was like actually this cat, like, for the longest period of time downplayed his Jewishness, because in that political arena that's what you need to do, and then only until now are we, he's starting to make that more of a known entity about himself.
And I would even
Mm.
argue, even on that hand, you know, like the video you had posted in our group, Obama black, he didn't do nothing for black people. He still did the
Right.
same racist American policies that we used to, ain't he? So apparently belonging to an oppressed organization or group.
And that's a point that I would like to emphasize as well. There tends to be this tendency when you say someone is a black white supremacist or whatever, like these terms can be thrown around in a way that makes them meaningless. But because you don't belong to a certain demographic doesn't mean you can't share their ideology, you know. And although this idea, like I said, is still thrown around very haphazardly, you still find that people you can be black, you can be an African American or descendant of freedmen, whatever you want to call it, and still subscribe to white supremacist ideology. You can believe that black people are inferior. You can believe that, you know, everything they say about black people is true. As much as a Jewish president can be sympathetic, to be generous, to Nazi ideology, right? It's not a precondition, right? That because I'm black, for example, that I can't have anti-black views. That is a cognitive dissonance, but that does not, I mean, human beings are complex individuals. So that does not mean that that cannot exist. I thought we were going to talk about some other stuff. I do have quite a bit of time left on this, so I'm going to let it play a little bit before I get into the Canada thing, because it's going to be with respect to Zelensky and everything.
Doesn't preclude a person to be more sensitive to
of
the
that
needs
group. Yeah.
of that group.
Yeah, in fact, in the comment, he was like that they, and I'm paraphrasing, but when it was brought up the fact that that he comes from a Jewish background, he was like, oh, that's like how did he put? He said something like that's like the not even in the top 20 list of things that are wrong about me. That's how that's how he referred to his Jewishness.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And
Let me
then
play
he
this clip
openly-
real quick.
Go ahead.
Let's see what's got.
Тут ніяку зброю ми не складемо. Будемо захищати нашу державу.
Vladimir Zelensky is the president of Ukraine. Just as Zelensky emerged an unlikely president, he's now emerged an unlikely war.
Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men on the planet that we speak of publicly. You know, there are always some behind the scenes people. Is a mouthpiece for the U.S. war state, the U.S. military industrial complex, the deep state. So whatever propaganda they need to say to push the narrative they're trying to push is what they're going to do. The Washington Post haven't been worth nothing since the time when that movie The Post was written about, the 40s or whatever. Maybe, with the Watergate scandal or the whatever. But they have been a compromised organization for decades. All of them, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of them. Because they have understood it is easier, it is better to maintain power this way by capturing the media.
War hero, and this has proved itself a very fitting role. He's used social media to make his presidential addresses approachable and relatable. He's filming himself in selfie mode on the streets of Kyiv, wearing sweaters and t-shirts.
Всі ми тут захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі.
That kind of communication has really resonated with Ukrainians and people around the world. And in his resolve to stay, it's clear he intends to defend his country and even die for it. When US officials offered to help him evacuate the city because he was in so much danger, he replied, "I need ammo, not a ride." His decision to stay, while, historically many other world leaders have fled, has really helped boost Ukrainian morale. People have drawn a stark contrast between his decision to stay and the decision of President Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 to leave. Afghans on Twitter have also bitterly noted that when the Taliban was closing in on Kabul in August, their president also chose to flee. It's also important to remember that domestically, Americans were probably first introduced to Zelensky during former President Trump's first impeachment. The president had allegedly withheld aid from Ukraine in a bid to pressure the country to investigate his political rivals.
They never thought I was going to release the phone call between the Ukrainian president and myself.
Before the Russian invasion, public opinion of President Zelensky was mixed. Some people thought that he wasn't trying hard enough to fight corruption in the country. Other people thought that he'd been too willing to appease Putin and have talks with Russia. But in this time of invasion, his willingness to stay and be in the streets has really boosted people's opinion of him. Before becoming the president of Ukraine, Zelensky's only experience as a politician was playing one on TV. In addition to his role on that satirical TV show, Zelensky made a name for himself in Ukraine as an actor and entertainer. He won Dancing with the Stars in 2006, and he was the voice of Ukrainian Paddington. He was also in a goofy, well-known comedy troupe. A lot of people have pointed out that perhaps this past experience as a performer has proved essential for right now. He's very
And I mean, that's very true what she was speaking, because we've been propagandized this whole time. So you can see how they manufactured this persona, this tough guy, military, idea that we see now. But the whole thing is manufactured. It's manufactured. It's intended to help the U.S. war state, to help the military industrial complex, and to further deny the descendants of freedmen the equality, the justice, the freedom that we deserve here in this country.
good at connecting with people. He's really good on camera. He's really delivering these impassioned speeches that are effectively helping the world understand the experience of Ukrainians right now.
Bloc states are free.
Negotiating with a larger nuclear power.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up some articles now. I thought that we had more video to talk about, but this is good. This is fine, because now I can kind of get into the bulk of a lot of what I wanted to talk about. Okay, so just to kind of get things going. Okay, we understand that we talked about funding, right? We talked about military funding and spending. We talked about last show, part 1, about how the money that's being sent to Ukraine could be used to do other things for Americans here at home. We're talking about how Congress approved a $113 billion budget aid package for Ukraine in 2022. So now we're going to look at the weapons. And I don't know, maybe I talked about it earlier in the video, because I recall speaking about it, but I have to watch again. But one of the things I talked about was Congressman John Conyers. He was one of the longest serving congressmen in America from the district that I grew up in Michigan. And he was one of the people responsible for making sure that weapons were not sent to Ukraine, because weapons and funding wouldn't be spent to Ukraine because of the Nazis. Okay, so here's an article from Bloomberg. I'm going to pull up. We'll read it together. This is from 2015, June 12th. So it says, Ukraine's neo-Nazis won't get U.S. money. What happens to the far-right militia when this round of fighting ends? And it says, oh, it's for subscribers only, so I've got to do some shenanigans to get it. Give me a second. So it's easy to see why Representative John Conyers, a Michigan Democrat, would have a problem with the military unit commanded by Ukrainian legislator Andrei Beletsky. Conyers is a founding member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Beletsky is a white supremacist. The House of Representatives has unanimously approved an amendment to the U.S. military budget proposed by Congress and Florida Republican Ted Yoho, banning support and training for, quote, the Ukrainian neo-Nazi paramilitary militia Azov Battalion, end quote. Azov was set up in May 2014 to fight pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. So this is when they were bombing all these people. Here's the group's Facebook page, describes the circumstances. In the first weeks after the Putin invasion of Donbass began, the authorities and law enforcers were confused and demoralized. Nationalists had to take initiative. Now, being a nationalist in and of itself doesn't necessarily make you a bad person, but it's usually when you're a white nationalist, ethno-nationalist, that you have that problem. You could theoretically be a nationalist who supports your own nation, and that means nothing for every other nation on the planet. But typically, being a nationalist precludes having empirical or evil motives. The Patriot of Ukraine organization and allied unofficial groups of right-wing youth rallied around Andrei Beletsky and challenged the separatists. By now, though, the Azov Battalion has become a regiment of the Ukrainian National Guard and enjoys the enthusiastic support of Interior Minister Arsen Avakov. Beletsky had run Patriot of Ukraine since 2005. In a 2010 interview, he described the organization as nationalist stormtroops. So let's see, I'll pull this up so we can kind of look at it together. As nationalist, quote, stormtroops, end quote, with its biggest unit in Kharkov, Beletsky's native city in eastern Ukraine. The group's ideology was, quote, social nationalism, end quote, a term Beletsky, a historian, knew would deceive no one because the Nazis were called national socialists. The main targets for Beletsky and his organization's hostility were immigrants in Kharkiv and the capital Kiev, both of which are relatively cosmopolitan cities. In 2007, Beletsky railed against a government decision to introduce fines for racist remarks. Here's what he said. So why the Negro love on a legislative level? They want to break everyone who has risen to defend themselves, their family, their right to be masters of their own land. They want to destroy the nation's biological resistance to everything alien and do to us what happened to old Europe, where the immigrant hordes are a nightmare for the French, Germans, and Belgians, where cities are blackening fast and crime and the drug trade and are invading even the remotest corners. Sorry, I had muted. I said, now think about this within the context of Ukraine being the most corrupt country in Europe. There's already crime and drugs. The corruption there is higher than any other country in Europe. But this is who our country chooses to defend and fund. Such expressions of hatred would be beyond the pale, even for the European far right. Beletsky landed in prison in 2011 after his organization took part in a series of shootouts and fights. Where's the black people that are responsible for these shootouts and fights? Following Ukraine's so-called Revolution of Dignity last year, which was the Maidan coup, he was freed as a political prisoner. Right-wing organizations with their paramilitary training played an important part in the violent phase of the uprising against former President Viktor Yanukovych. The new authorities, which included the ultra-nationalist party Svoboda, wanted to show their gratitude. The war in the East gave Beletsky's stormtroopers a chance at a higher status than they could have ever hoped to achieve. They fought fiercely, and last fall, the 400-strong Azov Battalion became part of the National Guard, receiving permission to expand to 2,000 fighters and gaining access to heavy weaponry. So what if some of its members had Nazi symbols tattooed on their bodies and the unit's banner bore the wolf's angle, which I showed you in the thumbnail of the previous video? There will be a better picture in the thumbnail of this video. Widely used by Nazis during World War II. In an interview with Ukraine's Focus magazine last September, Avakov, responsible for the National Guard, was protective of his heroes. He said of the wolf's angle, in many European cities, it is part of the city emblem. Yes, most of the guys who assembled in Azov have a particular worldview. That's what he calls white supremacists. It's a particular worldview. But who told you you could judge them? Don't forget that the Azov Battalion did for the, don't forget what the Azov Battalion did for the country. Remember the liberation of Mariupol, the fighting in Ilovaisk, the latest attacks near the Sea of Azov. May God allow anyone who criticizes them to do 10% of what they've done. And anyone who's going to tell me that these guys preach Nazi views, wear the swastika, and so on are barefaced liars and fools. 2 months later, Beletsky was a member of parliament. So they elected this guy to parliament. In that election, far-right parties failed to draw enough votes to make it into the national legislature, but an individual such as Beletsky did. He ran for office in a middle-class constituency of Kiev on this program. Quote, strong nation, honest authorities, a mighty country, end quote. That was enough to win him more than 30,000 votes. This year, when the U.S. sent military trainers to Western Ukraine to help the National Guard, Avakov said Azov would be among the first units to take part in the Fearless Guardian exercise, but the U.S. insisted the unit be left out. Now, Conyers and Yoho have almost succeeded in making Azov ineligible for any form of U.S. assistance. And understand that the U.S. was considering, contemplating, has done by now, offered assistance to these groups. Why is this even the situation we have to deal with? Why is this a issue that we have to wrestle with as a nation? Quote, and once the fighting ends, they pose a significant threat to the Ukraine. It says, quote, these groups run counter to American values, end quote, Conyers told Congress. Quote, and once the fighting ends, they pose a significant threat to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people. As we've seen many times, most notably within the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, these groups will not lay down their arms once the conflict is over, end quote. That is a reasonable assumption given that Beletsky's organization was training to fight well before the war started. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko should take note of Conyers' views as well as of Western calls for the repeal of a recent law that makes it obligatory to honor World War II era Ukrainian nationalist groups. Beletsky's graduation thesis was about one of them, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, a militia guilty of ethnic cleansing of Poles in Western Ukraine. This kind of baggage is hardly useful to a country that aims to become part of the Western world someday. Official Kiev will need to distance itself from its far-right heroes, far-right, quote, heroes, end quote, and perhaps even fight them. Okay, so that's it. And so that was in 2015. And so look at what happened. And I want to give some context why I think, with my tinfoil kufi, why I think brought the tinfoil kufi back, right? Why I think this is a problem at all. Okay, so let me bring this story out. So the Nation. This is from January 14th, 2016. Congress has removed a ban on funding neo-Nazis from its year-end spending bill. What happened? What changed? Did John Conyers suddenly become sympathetic to neo-Nazis, the longest-serving Black member of Congress in the history of the United States Congress? Let's see. Under pressure from the Pentagon, Congress has stripped the spending bill of an amendment that prevented funds from falling into the hands of Ukrainian neo-fascist groups. So the Pentagon had a hand in it. In mid-2015, Congress passed a 2,000-plus page omnibus. So again, we're looking at the omnibus package that caused McCarthy to lose his speakership. For fiscal year 2016, both parties were quick to declare victory after the passage of a $1.8 trillion package. White House spokesman Josh Earnest told reporters, "We feel good about the outcome primarily because we got a compromise budget agreement that fought off a wide variety of ideological writers." The office of Speaker Paul J. Ryan touted the bill's, quote, $64 billion for overseas contingency operations, end quote, for, among other things, assisting, quote, European countries facing Russian aggression, end quote. It would be safe to assume that one of the European countries which would stand to benefit from the omnibus measure, designed in part to combat, quote, Russian aggression, end quote, would be Ukraine, which has already, according to the White House, received $2 billion in loan guarantees and nearly $760 million in, quote, security, programmatic, and technical assistance, end quote, since February 2014. Let's see. Yet some have expressed concern that some of this aid has made its way to the hands of neo-Nazi groups, such as the Azov Battalion. Last summer, the Daily Beast published an interview by journalists Will Cathcart and Joseph Epstein, in which a member of the Azov Battalion spoke about, quote, his battalion's experience with U.S. trainers and U.S. volunteers quite fondly, even mentioning U.S. volunteers, engineers, and medics that are still currently assisting them, end quote. And so in July of last year, Congressman John Conyers of Michigan and Ted Yoho of Florida drew up an amendment to the House Defense Appropriations Bill, H.R. 2685, that, quote, limits arms training and other assistance to the neo-Nazi Ukrainian militia, the Azov Battalion, end quote. It passed by a unanimous vote in the House. And yet, by the time November came around and the conference debate over the year-end appropriation bill was underway, the Conyers-Yoho measure appeared to be in jeopardy. And indeed it was. An official familiar with the debate told the nation that the House Defense Appropriations Committee came under pressure from the Pentagon to remove the Conyers-Yoho amendment from the text of the bill. The Pentagon's objection to the Conyers-Yoho amendment rests on the claim that it is a redundant, because similar legislation known as the Leahy Law already exists that will prevent the funding of Azov. And so this is an interesting thing for me, because whenever you hear this type of thing with words and laws, does it cost more money to have this redundant law on the book if it is redundant after all? I don't think so. But what you see is that it will allow, and it has allowed, because we now know years later that it has funded these groups. The Leahy Law covers only those groups for which the Secretary of State has credible information that such a unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. Yet the State Department has never claimed to have such information about Azov, so funding to the group cannot be blocked by the Leahy Law or the Leahy Law. The congressional source I spoke to pointed out that quote, even if Azov is already covered by Leahy or Leahy, then there was no need to strip it out of the final bill, end quote. So what I just said. Indeed, the Leahy Law cannot block funding to groups no matter how noxious their ideology in the absence of, quote, credible information, end quote, that they have committed human rights violations. The Conyers-Yoho amendment was designed to remedy that shortcoming. Considering the fact that the U.S. Army has been training Ukrainian armed forces and National Guard troops, the Conyers-Yoho amendment made a great deal of sense. Blocking the avowedly neo-Nazi Azov Battalion from receiving U.S. assistance would further what President Obama often referred to as, quote, our interests and values, end quote. That neo-Nazis or neo-fascists, if you prefer, are a distinctly minority taste in Western Ukraine is a clear and is not in dispute. Of late, however, there have been troubling signs that they may become a force to be reckoned with, according to the Jerusalem Post. Okay, and so out in there, I'm basically done with the article up to that point. But what you find is John Conyers had a Me Too accusation in 2016 that forced him to step down, and he died shortly after. And so it is my theory, that's why I had the tinfoil kufi, that it is through that the legislation was able to be removed from the bill, because John Conyers would have made a big deal about this. All politicians are full of it. But I have found, and I'm surely biased, that John Conyers has been on the right side of more issues than the wrong side. And he is not perfect. And this is not a defense of his career, because he's still a politician. And the country has still, and this community, his congressional district was still trash. But understanding that context, okay? So Biden says he's worried about Ukraine aid, and he plans to give a major address about it. We talked about how much aid, right? And so one of the things we talked about is weapons to Ukraine. There's been large amounts of weapons given to Ukraine in order for them to defend themselves. But Ukraine, being one of the most corrupt countries on the planet and the most corrupt country in Europe, there were some completely foreseeable consequences. And I even spoke about them on the show. It didn't play in that video, so maybe it was a different episode. We talked about it a bit, or maybe it was earlier than what I played. But from the Cato Institute, which is a conservative, maybe even a neoconservative think tank, the tragic but unsurprising cost of loose U.S. weapons in Ukraine. Jordan Cohen, May 24th, 2023. Over the last 48 hours, national news outlets have begun reporting that Ukrainian militias use U.S.-made armored vehicles, albeit unconfirmed by the U.S. government, in an attack over the Russian border, and that Ukraine's security services conducted a drone attack against the Kremlin earlier this month. It is important to note that despite Washington's support for Ukraine, the United States was not involved in either attack. This recent escalation with U.S. weapons systems in one case is disappointing but not surprising. Since the start of the conflict, 8 different editorials addressing loose weapons in Ukraine. I have written 8 different editorials addressing loose weapons in Ukraine. This weapons dispersion happens for a few reasons. First, there is a history of weapons dispersion in Ukraine. According to the 2021 Global Organized Crime Index, Ukraine has one of the largest illegally trafficked arms markets in Europe. So when he was talking about the blackening of Europe and drugs and guns and crime, if he's already saying that the immigrants, the Negroes, aren't there yet, how do you explain this for 2021? About 300,000 small arms and light weapons were reported lost or stolen after Russia seized land during the invasions of Crimea between 2013 and 2015. Of these, only slightly more than 13% are recovered, while the vast majority remains in circulation on the black market. All of this was already a problem before the conflict. The invasion exacerbated these issues as the country was flooded with the sudden influx of millions of arms and ammunition, and an increasing number of civilians received military training and weapons. Okay. This sort of weapon, I'm going to just go up. This sort of weapons dispersion is not surprising, nor are its effects. Loose U.S. weapons threaten to entangle the United States in a conflict with another nuclear power by unintentionally increasing escalation against Russia, while also risking further destabilization within Ukraine. If a disagreement breaks out between different armed groups or in any post-conflict situation, the world has seen weapons dispersion of U.S. arms cause similar damage twice over the last 2 years. First, in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have used U.S. weapons left behind to arm themselves and generate profits. Second, in Yemen, when U.S. weapons sales to Saudi Arabia turned the United States into an unwitting participant in the conflict. Okay, there's one. Here's a CNN article. CNN is a propaganda arm, so they'll always find a way to benefit the establishment. And for all we know, this report was taken verbatim from the Pentagon. The Pentagon typed this up, gave it to Natasha Bertrand and Haley Britsky, allowed them to put their names on it, and here they are reporting it. Pentagon watchdog finds some Western weaponry sent to Ukraine was stolen before being recovered last year. This image says, In this January 2022 photo, airmen and civilians from the 436th Aerial Port Squadron placed ammunition, weapons, and other equipment bound for Ukraine on a pallet at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Criminals, volunteer fighters, and arms traffickers in Ukraine stole some Western-provided weapons and equipment intended for Ukrainian troops last year before it was recovered, according to a Defense Department Inspector General report obtained by CNN. The plots to steal the weaponry and equipment were disrupted by Ukraine's intelligence services, and it was ultimately recovered, according to the report titled, quote, DOD's Accountability of Equipment Provided to Ukraine, end quote. CNN obtained the report via a Freedom of Information Act request. Military.com first reported the news. But the Inspector General report noted that after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, the Defense Department's ability to attack and monitor all the U.S. equipment pouring into Ukraine, as required by law under the Arms Export Control Act, faced, quote, challenges, end quote, because of the limited U.S. presence in the country. Okay? Another example. Here's another one. Now, they say this was a mistranslation. But let's look at this from the AP News. Mistranslated news report sparks baseless claim about Mexican cartel getting weapon from Ukraine. Claim a Mexican news outlet reported that a member of a local organized crime group was pictured with a U.S.-made Javelin anti-tank guided missile that had been trafficked from Ukraine to cartels. AP's assessment, false. The video shows a news anchor claiming in Spanish that a cartel member had been filmed with a javelin. But she only noted that such weapons have also been used in Ukraine, not that it originated there. Additionally, the anchor misidentified the weapon, which is an AT-4, another anti-tank weapon. While AT-4s are being used in Ukraine, experts say there's nothing to indicate that the one in the video came from there, and that it is far more likely to have come from other black market channels. So again, this is just obfuscation and propaganda, because they're trying to assess blame in all these different directions rather than acknowledge and admit what is going on here. You have proliferated weapons not only throughout Europe, but throughout the world in the name of spreading democracy in Ukraine, of not spreading, but stabilizing democracy in Ukraine. Okay. Again, dealing with the situation in Israel. From RT, which is a Russian news organization. Hamas using weapons given to Ukraine, ex-Russian president. Arms Washington sent to Kiev and left in Afghanistan are about to be, quote, uncontrollably used, end quote, around the world. Dmitry Medvedev has warned. The weapons Kiev's Western backers have actively supplied to Ukraine have found their way to Hamas militants and are now, quote, being actively used in Israel, end quote. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said in a Telegram post on Monday, adding that any future military hardware supplied to Kiev could end up on the black market as well. Quote, it will only get worse from here, end quote, Medvedev warned, predicting that the world should, quote, expect missiles, tanks, and even planes from Kiev on the black market soon, end quote. Now, what do you expect from the most corrupt country in Europe, one of the most corrupt countries, on the planet? What do we expect? His words came amid rumors that Hamas militants that control the Gaza Strip had gotten their hands on some U.S.-made weaponry before their attack on Israel over the weekend. No solid evidence confirming these claims has emerged so far. However, an unverified video circulating online showed a Palestinian militant displaying assorted U.S.-made pieces, including a standard-issue M136 anti-tank grenade launcher, while thanking Ukrainians for the weapons. Okay, and now this is from Ed Krasenstein. He's kind of like got Trump derangement syndrome. But here's what he says about the situation with Hamas from his Twitter. He says, if I can pull this up, he says, breaking. It's being reported that Russia is handing over American-made weapons to Hamas militants as a way to try and discredit Ukraine and America. If true, this means Russia should be viewed as an ally of the Hamas terrorists. Get ready for some Russian propaganda that will be pushed by some U.S. media. These are weapons that the Russians have taken from Ukraine in the course of the war. They allegedly plan to blame Ukraine for selling the weapon that America gave them to the Hamas terrorist organization. Should NATO or the U.S. do anything about this? Now, these weapons, I mean, you've heard it. We've talked about Fast and Furious, but the overarching theme is that this is a neo-Nazi organization. This country is full of neo-Nazis whose ideology is spreading to the U.S. How many mass shootings by white supremacists or white supremacist ideologues have occurred? And since we want to talk about the Nazi situation and weaponry, I want to talk about Canada. So the last couple of weeks, Canada has had a bit of a reckoning with respect to its own Nazi past. This is from this article is from when? September 29th, 2023. Canada has a dark history with Nazis. Political scandal prompts a reckoning. After a Nazi veteran was lauded in Parliament, a debate over suspected war criminals who settled in the country is reignited. Standing in the House of Commons this week, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologized after a war veteran who fought alongside the Nazis was invited into the country's parliament, called a, quote, hero, end quote, and celebrated with 2, and it really was 3, standing ovations. Trudeau said all lawmakers, quote, regret deeply, end quote, having stood and clapped, quote, even though we did so unaware of the context, end quote, adding that the event was a disservice to the memory of millions, quote, targeted by the Nazi genocide, end quote. Quote, every year there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors to share firsthand the horrors of what they experienced, end quote, said Trudeau. Quote, and it is therefore incumbent upon us all to ensure that no one ever forgets what happened, end quote. And you've got these lawmakers who seem to have forgotten history. But the momentary amnesia of forgetfulness seemingly shared by all lawmakers who applauded that day has transformed into a costly political scandal and prompted a broader reexamination of the legacy of Nazi-linked Ukrainian groups in Canada. During the Second World War, Ukraine was one of the main battlefields of the Eastern Front. About 4.5 million Ukrainians fought in the Red Army. Far fewer, approximately 250,000, aligned themselves with Nazi Germany. Some factions at different times fought both Soviet and German forces. Some were involved in the mass killing of Ukrainian Jews. Now, that last bit may be true, that some fought against the Soviets and the Germans. But what you can pretty much just take to be the case is that if you fought against the Soviet Union during World War II, you were a fascist or a Nazi. This is the first I'm even hearing that there was a third option. Yaroslav Honka, the 98-year-old veteran lauded in Ukraine's parliament, this guy here, this individual right here, was a member of the SS 14th Waffen Division, a volunteer unit known as the Galicia Division. So this was a volunteer Nazi paramilitary organization. The SS was a Nazi paramilitary organization, and he voluntarily joined. He's 98. Towards the end of the Second World War, the group was also known as the first Ukrainian division of the Ukrainian National Army, which in the following years had the effect of obscuring its links to the Nazi regime. After the war, thousands of Ukrainians moved to Canada, and many who had lived through Stalin's terror and the ensuing mass starvation held strongly anti-Soviet views, but possible links and sympathies to the Nazis were largely overlooked as the Cold War set in, said Ivan Kaczynski, a political scientist at the University of Ottawa. Despite the Galicia Division's links to war crimes, a cenotaph celebrating the unit was erected in Canada's largest Ukrainian cemetery. The memorial has long been a source of frustration for Polish and Jewish groups. In June 2020, the words, quote, Nazi war monument, end quote, were spray painted on the cenotaph. Quote, the group and the memorials to the fighters have really escaped scrutiny because so few people know the 1st Ukrainian Division was just a different name for the SS 14th Waffen Division. And this was one of the reasons, unfortunately, why no one raised the issue in Parliament last week, end quote, said Kaczynski. When he took the stage at Canada's Parliament a week ago, Zelensky praised the city of Edmonton for being the first place in the world to erect a commemoration of the Holodomor famine, a deliberate policy from the Soviet Union which killed millions of Ukrainians. 5 miles south, a bust of the Ukrainian military leader Roman Shukayev, atop a stone plinth, has long outraged Jewish and Polish groups. Shukevich, who fought for Ukrainian independence, served with Nazis and is believed to have been a perpetrator of massacres in Volhynia and Eastern Galicia. Diplomats from Poland and Israel condemned a similar memorial in Ukraine recently, alleging Shukevich was responsible for the murder of tens of thousands by bullets, fire, rape, and torture. So let me show you the clip of everybody in Parliament clapping for this guy. Let me see. Sorry, give me one moment. Okay. About a minute clip.
This is how using aluminum foil incorrectly can cause your brain to shut down in the next 2 years. Aluminum is one of the 5 common neurotoxins found in your kitchen that causes plaque formation, memory loss, and even dementia. The alarm.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian World veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today.
Now that pause that he gave in my mind signifies that he knew in the look on his face that what he was saying was evil, because he understood that who he was talking about was a Nazi. I'll just play it again so you can hear it. With the pause and the look on his face when he looks up says to me that he understands that what he is saying is bullshit.
The troops today, even at his age of 98, and continues to support the troops today. A veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today.
His eyes went up. His eyebrows went up. He paused because you realize that you are honoring a Nazi in that moment. He took ultimate blame for this decision. He had to resign as Speaker of the House. But there have been images of the Jewish president of Ukraine and the Prime Minister of Canada clapping in this video, but also meeting with this individual prior to him coming to Parliament to speak. And so imagine, not only are you meeting the president of your own country, but the president of another country, and you having had your background researched with a fine-tooth comb? The prime minister of the country that you live in, does not know who you are to the best of his ability, and he's going to be in the same room as you? What type of security measures are they taking if they expect me to believe that is the case? But this is how they want you to think. Just like in The Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Even at his age of 98.
I also wanted everybody to see that it looks like a Hispanic gentleman next to him. He doesn't seem to be enthused about celebrating this individual. He doesn't clap with the same ferocity as everyone else. He seems to be looking at this individual with the knowledge that he is a Nazi. And that if it were 1940 something, he may also have been in his crosshairs. Look at that again.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. I wish to make a brief statement. I wish to apologize to the House. No one, including you, my fellow parliamentarians, or the Ukraine delegation, was privy to my remarks prior to their delivery.
And listen to what he said. No one here, I'm accepting all blame. Because now you would expect the prime minister to step down. You would wonder why the president of Ukraine is honoring this individual. Surely he must know who this individual is and what he stood for. So he has fallen on the sword for Justin Trudeau in the Canadian Parliament because you honored a Nazi. But that doesn't erase the history. And this is what I'm talking about. The point of this. When we ally with these people, when you try to build allyships with this country, when you try to work in good faith with this country, like Henry Kissinger said, U.S. has no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. So when Donald Trump is president and he's having that march in Charlottesville, you call all those people Nazis. And I agree. And now, fast forwarded 5 years, 6 years, you have a literal Nazi being honored in the Canadian Parliament and U.S. funding and weapons being sent to neo-Nazis whose ideology has spread back to America. And I'm supposed to disregard it. Sorry. Here you have the Prime Minister of Canada on the right, the President of Ukraine on the left, and back behind there is the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. Her name is Chrystia Freeland. Her grandfather was a Nazi too. Her grandfather was a Canadian Nazi too. And I have an article with images of her wearing Ukrainian nationalist paraphernalia. She knows her grandfather was a Nazi. These are the people who we are supposed to take seriously and believe are fighting for democracy around the country, around the globe, are pushing interests around the globe. This is why you cannot be willing to give your life to fight these evil people, because now you play into their hands. I have an article I want to share. So, they honored a Nazi. Canada honored a Nazi in 1987. In 1987, they honored a Nazi. From Reuters. October 4th, 2023. Canada apologizes for honor awarded to ex-Nazi soldier in 1987. Canada's Governor General Mary Simon has apologized for a top Canadian honor awarded to a former Nazi. I don't know how you can be a former Nazi. I think there are certain things that a person can do that no matter how much forgiveness we allow, you are what you are. You have crossed a Rubicon of sorts, and that is who you are. You don't get to be a former Nazi. The ideology is what makes you a Nazi, not your participation in the, You were a member of the real Nazis, not a neo-Nazi. You were a member of the organization. Just like they say, once a Marine, always a Marine. You were a Nazi. You're only not a Nazi because they lost. Right? That's it. You one of them. You're there. To a former Nazi soldier who moved to Canada after World War II and went on to become the Chancellor of the University of Alberta. The Governor General at the time awarded the Order of Canada, a top civilian honor that recognizes outstanding achievement and service to the nation, to Peter Savarin, who was praised for promoting multiculturalism in Canada. And this is what they do, man. They come and they hide, and you don't know. My dad always talked to me about the devil, right? He would say, everybody think the devil got horns and pitchfork, and he gonna come with cloven hoof and get you, and you gonna see him coming. And he would say the devil wears a suit and tie. But Savarin had a past serving in one of Adolf Hitler's Waffen SS units. Quote, "It is with deep regret that we acknowledge that Mr. Peter Savarin was appointed to the Order of Canada in 1987. And we express our sincere apology to Canadians for any distress or pain his appointment may have caused," end quote. Said a statement from Simon's office shared with Reuters on Wednesday. Simon's apology was first reported on Tuesday by Jewish publication Forward, which raised concerns over Savarin's background in the wake of a scandal over Yaroslav Hunka, a former, I keep saying former, Nazi soldier who was praised in Canada's parliament. Savarin and Hunka had fought in the same Waffen SS division. That incident led to the resignation of the House Speaker, who said he had made a mistake. Savarin's appointment to the order was terminated after his death in 2017 per protocol. Quote, "Historical appointments to the Order of Canada reflect a specific moment in time and would have been based on limited information sources available at the time." Quote, the statement from Simon's office said. So forgive us. We let people meet our president. We give people the highest civilian award you can give somebody, and we don't do any background checks. Doesn't that make you feel safe living in Canada? You can go and meet the president of Canada or the prime minister of Canada. And if you wanted to hit them or something, you could, because nobody would even know. Nobody would even check. I'm supposed to believe that. Here's some interesting information. This is from CCR Web. This is an interesting situation. CCRweb.ca. It's a Canadian. It's a council Canadian Council for Refugees. So, a brief history of Canada's responses to refugees. On 4th June 1969, Canada belatedly signed the convention relating to the status of refugees, 18 years after it was adopted by the United Nations, and 15 years after it entered the force. In the 40 years since Canada became a party to the Refugee Convention, it has gained the enviable reputation of being a world leader in protecting refugees. And one of the things that I always thought about Canada, the more I learned about its history, was that a lot of the niceness that you see being projected in its media and this quaint, down-home, quiet folksiness that they have is a projection. It's a compensation for the evil that it committed. Canada is just as evil as America. They just don't get the attention because America is the big brother on the block. Canada had Native Americans that they slaughtered and took their land from east to west. But because America is so loud, we get all the attention. Early 1930s. In the context of the Depression and fears of communism, there were many deportations of the unemployed, labor activists, and suspected communists. Risk of persecution was not a barrier to deportation, despite concerns raised by the Canadian Labor Defense League about the dangers of return to fascist countries. Hans Kist, one of the radical leaders deported in 1932, reportedly died of torture in a German concentration camp. With the rise of Adolf, in 1930s, with the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, efforts were made by the Jewish community and some non-Jewish groups to persuade the government to admit refugees. They were unsuccessful. Anti-Semitism was dominant within the immigration department and in the Canadian public. 1938. The St. Louis sailed from Hamburg with 907 Jewish refugees on board. After being turned away by Cuba, their original destination, the ship sought a haven elsewhere in the Americas. Canada, like all other countries, refused them admittance. The ship returned to Europe, where most of the passengers died in the Holocaust. U.S. President Roosevelt in 1938 convened a conference in Evian to discuss solutions to the refugee crisis. Canada participated reluctantly and with the firm intention of making no commitments to admit any refugees. 1933 to 1945. During the 12-year period of Nazi rule in Germany, Canada admitted fewer than 5,000 Jewish refugees, one of the worst records of any democracies. In 1945, asked how many Jews Canada would admit after the war, a Canadian official answered, "None is too many." And if I'm not mistaken, Canada admitted about 6,000 Nazis. Might be it's between 2,000 and 6,000. They were so afraid of communism, or so that what we were expected to believe, that they allowed this vast number of Nazis to come into the country. But they're allowed to completely whitewash their history because nobody talks about it. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights is located on Indigenous ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We acknowledge that the water in the museum comes from the Shoal Lake and are grateful to the First Nations that care for that water. So here they are trying to play up this whole idea of multiculturalism. And, you know, the First Nations, and we revere them and we thank them, and we have this land. Our museum is on native land. And this is, this is virtue signaling. Canada, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism closed Canada's borders to Jews attempting to free Nazi persecution, by Jeremy Marin, November 5, 2021. Anti-Jewish persecution in Nazi Germany and beyond intensified during the 30s. Under Adolf Hitler's regime, many Jews were desperate to escape. Yet even as the Nazis' ambitions to eradicate the Jewish people were becoming clear, very few countries would open their borders to them. Canada was one of the many nations that refused to admit Jews trying to flee the anti-Semitic oppression that would culminate in the Holocaust. In 1930s Canada, the social and economic hardship of the Great Depression caused some Canadians to look for scapegoats to blame. This led to increased intolerance and suspicion towards minority groups, including Jews. Despite the worsening conditions for Jewish people in Nazi Europe, anti-Semitic sentiments and even support for the Nazis were widely and openly promoted in Canada. Given the breadth of these sentiments, Canadian Jews face discrimination and exclusion from parts of Canadian society. This individual in this picture is Adrien Arcand. In 1934, he founded the fascist party, Nationalist Socialist Social Chrétien, Christian National Social Party in Quebec. Arcand wrote and spread anti-Semitic materials as part of his political strategy to establish a fascist state in Canada, based on his admiration of Adolf Hitler. In this image, Arcand, wearing a uniform bearing a swastika, speaks to supporters. So here's a synagogue. I'm assuming it's a synagogue with swastikas painted on it. Two people play hockey in front of a synagogue with swastikas painted on it in Sainte Marguerite, Quebec. Unsurprisingly, anti-Jewish sentiment was also commonly found among Canada's political leaders. Anti-Semitic perspective and stereotypes led Canada to severely restrict the number of Jewish refugees let into the country. This restriction would have lethal consequences for Jews living in Nazi Europe, who were hoping to flee increasingly violent persecution. Frederick Charles Blair, pictured here in 1932, was Canada's Director of Immigration before and during the Holocaust. Under William Lyon Mackenzie King's government, Blair developed and enforced restrictive anti-Semitic immigration policies designed to keep Jewish refugees from coming to Canada. Despite the frantic efforts of advocates both within and beyond the Canadian Jewish community, Canada would admit only a small number of Jews attempting to escape Nazi oppression. Between 33 and 48, less than 5,000 Jewish refugees were allowed into Canada. Okay, so this is that ship, the St. Louis. So this kind of gives you context to the people. You know, we think of the olden times, but these were the people on that boat. In the years and decades after the war, many Holocaust survivors did eventually come to Canada and make it their home. However, the nation's refusal to admit Jews threatened by Nazi regime contributed to the deaths of many who were unable to find a route to escape. Okay. The significance of all this, and there was a report. Let's see if I can find the report right quick. It was a 2006 report. It was a 2006 report by the FBI explaining how white supremacists had infiltrated law enforcement around the country. So let's see. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to stop this screen share and add a new screen. Let's see. Here we go. Share that. So it says, unclassified law enforcement sensitive. Federal Bureau of Investigation Intelligence Assessment. White supremacist infiltration of law enforcement, 17 October 2006. Handling notice. Recipients are reminded that FBI intelligence assessments contain sensitive terrorism and counterterrorism information meant for use primarily within the law enforcement community. Such assessments are not to be released either in written or oral form to the media, the general public, or other personnel who do not have a valid need to know without prior approval from an authorized FBI official. So it's been unclassified. It's sensitive, but I mean, apparently it's available online. It says, white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement. Scope note. This intelligence assessment provides an overview of white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement and derives its information from FBI investigation and open sources available as of August 2006. This assessment addresses the terrorism topic of the NIPF in response to intelligence requirement. Key judgments. Although white supremacist groups have historically engaged in strategic efforts to infiltrate and recruit from law enforcement communities, current reporting on attempts reflects self-initiated efforts by individuals, particularly among those already within law enforcement ranks, to volunteer their professional resources to white supremacist causes with which they sympathize. The primary threat from infiltration or recruitment arises from the areas of intelligence, collection, and exploitation, which can lead to investigative breaches and jeopardize the safety of law enforcement sources and personnel. White supremacist presence among law enforcement personnel is a concern due to the access they may possess to restricted areas vulnerable to sabotage and to elected officials or protected persons whom they could see as potential targets for violence. In addition, white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement can result in other abuses of authority and passive tolerance of racism within communities served. The intelligence acquired through the successful infiltration of law enforcement by one white supremacist group can benefit other groups due to the multiple allegiances white supremacists typically hold. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Maybe I'll post a link to this in case anybody wants to read it from the description. But in 2006, this was published. And still, you have people defending police officers. You still have every lawyer, every prosecutor, every body in government who was arguing against these racist attacks by the police, who did not use this as a source, was intentionally doing a bad job in order that no charges will be brought against these individuals. Time after time, you see police officers killing unarmed or attacking unarmed Black people. And here you have, from the United States FBI, proof that white supremacist organizations have infiltrated law enforcement. As if we needed this to tell us anything. But this is what I'm saying. This is the situation we are in. I'm going to pull up another article. I know it's very article heavy, this show, but it covers a lot of topics that I wanted us to look at because I think it's important just to see who the people are in charge and how nothing means anything to these people. Nothing has a value. Nothing is sacred. Everything is a tool for them. Okay. So here you go. This is the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. I believe she's also the Finance Minister, is what they call it in Canada. See, I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay, I'm going to share this, and we'll start from here. So, Canada's future prime minister needs to come clean about her Nazi collaborationist grandfather. So this is May 12th, 2022. It says an assumption that she will eventually succeed Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister of Canada. I don't know how likely that is, in light of recent events, but this is from May 12th, 2022. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland's electoral base is in Canada's Ukrainian diaspora community, which has rebranded Nazi collaborators as nationalist war heroes. So this is her. Okay. Looks like a Baba Yaga to me, keeping with the cultural reference. On January 26, 2022, in the midst of Russia's preparations to invade Ukraine, Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, issued a statement outlining why Canada, home to the largest Ukrainian diaspora outside of Russia, would support Ukraine unconditionally. I mean, think about that now. In the context of the Nazi situation, you have the largest amount of Ukrainians outside of Russia. a Ukrainian diaspora outside of Russia. And Russia's next door. They share a border. That's weird. And I don't mean it's weird like, you know, how peculiar. It's weird that Canada is so very Nazi friendly and you never hear about it. Oh, that's where the black people could go and get freedom. And it's like, they were like, nah, we're not doing that again. We're bringing in white people. Outlining a Manichaean view of, quote, a struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, end quote. Quote, Canadians, our own parents and grandparents, fought and died, end quote. She continued, quote, to establish a rules-based international order during and after the Second World War, end quote. And, you know, neoliberals love to talk about that, the rules-based international order. It is essentially a shorthand to say that whatever America says goes. That's the rule. You know, in theory, it is supposed to outline the process for how disputes are handled. We don't go to war anymore. We go to arbitration. We do these sanctions and all this stuff. And everybody just basically, you know, it's like the human resourcification of the real world, right? And but like I said, it's a shorthand for America makes the rules. It's like a neoliberal shorthand. Freeland's Ukrainian grandfather on her mother's side, Michael Chomiak, did nothing of the sort. During the war, he edited Krakivsky Visti, a Nazi propaganda rag in occupied Krakow that was printed on a press confiscated from a Jewish newspaper. Freeland, of course, is not her grandfather, nor is she responsible for his actions. But she is responsible for bringing him up at every opportunity to portray him as a liberal Democrat who profoundly influenced her politics. Quote, my maternal grandparents fled Western Ukraine after Hitler and Stalin signed their non-aggression pact in 1939. They never dared to go back, but they stayed in close touch with their brothers and sisters and their families who remained behind, end quote. She wrote in a 2015 essay for the Brookings Institution entitled, quote, My Ukraine, end quote. For the rest of my grandparents' lives, they saw themselves as political exiles with a responsibility to keep alive the idea of an independent Ukraine, which had last existed briefly during and after the chaos of 1917. Russian Revolution. The dream persisted into the next generation, and in some cases, the generation after that, end quote. A Toronto Star Puff piece from 2015 described Freeland's grandfather as a, quote, lawyer and journalist, end quote, who fled Western Ukraine after the Soviets invaded, while conveniently ignoring the nature of his journalism. Quote, all my grandparents loved Canada, but my Ukrainian grandfather was the most passionate, end quote, Freeland said in 2016. She used the occasion of Black Ribbon Day, which perpetuates a false equivalence between Nazism and communism, to tweet a loving tribute to her maternal grandparents. Quote, they were forever grateful to Canada for giving them refuge, and they worked hard to bring freedom and democracy to Ukraine, end quote, Freeland tweeted. The Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister's revisionist family history is part of a broader project of myth-making and part of the Ukrainian diaspora, in which certain anti-Soviet Nazi collaborators are often rebranded as nationalist war heroes. In Edmonton, where Freeland was raised, there are two monuments commemorating Ukrainian Nazi collaborators, a bust of Roman, couldn't say his name last time, I'm not going to try it now, who massacred thousands of Jews and Poles, has stood outside the Ukrainian Youth Unity Complex since the 1970s. In addition to a monument to the 14th Waffen SS Division, which was celebrated in the pages of Kravitsky Visti at a local cemetery. Many Ukrainian diaspora community leaders in Canada maintain that these Ukrainians were in fact anti-Nazi, in addition to being vehemently anti-communist, and that claims to the contrary are Russian propaganda. When reports of Michael Chomiak's wartime activities first begun to circulate in the Russian and Polish press in 2017, Freeland, who was then Minister of Foreign Affairs, claimed the story was a piece of Russian disinformation designed to undermine Canadian democracy. Quote, American officials have publicly said, and even Angela Merkel has publicly said, there were efforts on the Russian side to destabilize Western democracies, and I think it shouldn't come as a surprise if these same efforts were used against Canada, end quote. So again, this is repeating a story of Russian propaganda. When we investigate Joe Biden for his corruption, for his crackhead son, and for their business dealings, there's Russian propaganda, and we find out that not to be the case. When the ADOS movement or freedmen say we're going to do Operation Down Ballot, they label all of us Russian bots, right? We see how they continually try to undermine legitimate movements for freedom, justice, equality, whatever, or even genuine inquiries into the evil atrocities committed by, through, at the direction or at the hand of the U.S. empire and its subordinates. And these people want us to continue to take them seriously and to give them credence and deference as it pertains to issues of war and government and peace and the economy and what you experience on a daily basis. So it says, Freeland told reporters who inquired about her grandfather, the opposition conservative foreign affairs critic of the day, Peter Kent, accused the Russian government of, quote, trying to smear a minister with historical detail that has probably been misrepresented, end quote. The Canadian government retaliated the following year by expelling 4 Russian diplomats, which Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said was a result of their, quote, sharing scurrilous stories, end quote, about Freeland. Although the story about Chomiak's past was amplified in pro-Russian media, it didn't start there, and Freeland knew it. In 1996, Freeland's uncle and Chomiak's son-in-law, University of Alberta Holocaust historian John Paul Himka, wrote a paper in the Journal of Ukrainian Studies on Krivishki Visti in the context of Ukrainian-Jewish relations. In the first footnote of the piece, Himke thanks none other than Chrystia Freeland, who prior to her political career worked as a journalist at the Globe and Mail, the Financial Times, and Reuters. For her editorial assistance, asked about her role in editing her uncle's paper, Freeland's office finally acknowledged without elaboration or any explanation of her previous obfuscation, quote, her uncle's efforts to study and publish on this difficult chapter in her late grandfather's past, end quote. This paper was created in 1940 for Ukrainian nationalists who had fled Lviv, the capital of Ukrainian Galicia, after the Soviets invaded the year before and settled in Kharkov. Himka explains, he notes that the paper did include valuable articles on Ukrainian history and culture that are worth reading for those interested in the subject. It also published anti-Semitic propaganda in line with Nazi war aims. Out of disdain for the Soviets, many Ukrainian nationalists regarded the Nazis as temporary allies of convenience for their broader aim of securing national independence from Moscow. At the time, Ukrainians were stateless, with modern-day Ukraine divided between the Soviet Union, Poland, Romania, and Czechoslovakia, which I talked about in the video that we watched that concerns the topic that we're discussing. They were very interested in, quote, they were very interested in helping the Germans with those issues they had a common interest in. And one of those was removing Jews from the territory, end quote. Himka explained to the Progress Report, quote, a very important group of Ukrainian nationalists wanted a Ukraine for Ukrainians. So they wanted to remove one way or another all nationalist minorities, end quote. While most nationalist newspapers in Nazi-occupied Europe were run directly by Germans, Chomiak's paper was not, suggesting a degree of trust and collegiality between the paper's editorial staff and Nazi authorities. Indeed, Ukrainian-Canadian researcher Alex Boykowicz unearthed a photo from the province of Alberta archives of Chomiak at a social gathering with Emil Gassner, who was in charge of the Nazis' press department, and answered directly to Joseph Goebbels, which I believe he was their chief propaganda minister, in addition to other documents revealing the extent of Chomiak's collaboration. So I'll try to post this link in the description for others. Here's another from the Globe and Mail. And let's see. From the Globe and Mail. Freeland knew her grandfather was editor of the Nazi newspaper. Here's Baba Yaga again. This article was published more than 6 years ago. Some information may no longer be current. So this is from 2017. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland knew for more than 2 decades that her maternal grandfather was the chief editor of a Nazi newspaper in occupied Poland. So I'm going to probably cover a lot of the same information I just read. I'll skip that. Here's the one I wanted to show that I thought was particularly interesting because it shows her with the fascist symbol of the Ukrainian nationalist organization. Read the maple. Canada's deputy PM posed with a Ukrainian fascist symbol. Journalists shouldn't ignore what Chrystia Freeland did or the many other fascist flags at that rally and others throughout Canada. March 1st, 2022. So here she is. This is, it says, I think this Slava Ukraini, which was it's a phrase they've been saying a lot now. I'm actually trying to learn Russian, so that's how come I can make that out. It says the Christians, she's since deleted the tweet, but Slava Ukraini is a phrase that they say now. And it was a phrase that the Ukrainian Nazis used as a motto. I don't know. I can't remember what it means. On February 27th, a large Ukrainian solidarity protest was held in downtown Toronto. The event unsurprisingly received a ton of coverage from mainstream media, but it all failed to mention a certain red and black flag at the protest. The red and black flag in question belongs to the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA, which was a fascist paramilitary group that operated during the Second World War and collaborated with the Nazis at times throughout this period. In 1943, according to researcher Terry Martin, the UPA, quote, adopted a policy of massacring and expelling the Polish population of Volhynia and Eastern Galicia, end quote. Researchers estimate that members of the group killed around 100,000 Polish civilians over the next year. In his 2006 book, Europe at War, 1939 through 1945, No Simple Victory, historian Norman Davies wrote, quote, villages were torched, Roman Catholic priests were axed or crucified, churches were burned with all their parishioners, isolated farms were attacked by gangs carrying pitchforks and kitchen knives, throats were cut, pregnant women were bayoneted, children were cut in two, end quote. The flag continues to be used by groups in Ukraine today that share a similar far-right fascist ideology. The resurgence of the flag has been tracked by Edward Dolinsky, the Director General of the Ukrainian Jewish Committee in Ukraine, among others. He has documented that it has appeared at all levels of society and government throughout Ukraine, although obviously not all Ukrainians support it. Going back to Toronto on the day of the protest, I tweeted a photo of the UPA flag being held by a protester. Now, I've been at pro-Palestinian protests before that have been smeared in the press because of a single flag or banner being held by someone in the crowd. I didn't think the media coverage was fair, and I detested how anyone at the protest who ended up in the media, including 1 or 2 politicians, was forced to answer if they condemned the flag's presence or not. So I'm well aware that the presence of one UPA flag at Toronto's protest wouldn't indicate that everyone there supports the group's ideology, and it would be unfair for the media to cover it as such. Still, I think there are many fundamental differences between this example and what I've dealt with in the past that both make it more troubling and also render the media's lack of coverage of the flag's presence inexcusable. Here's why the media should have absolutely dedicated some reporting to this matter and needs to do so in the future. First, as I mentioned, a ton of media outlets covered this protest with original reporting as well as photography. Now, this is a particularly interesting point because during the trucker protests in Canada over the lockdowns for the virus, there was one Nazi flag and one Stars and Bars Confederate flag. And the Prime Minister of Canada saw fit to label everyone there a Nazi or a racist. And now you literally have the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada holding a white supremacist flag and smiling about it. And no one cares. So here it is. Just so you can hear, he breaks down what Slava Ukraini. Freeland decided to share this photo on Twitter along with the phrase Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, which was used by the UPA as well as other Ukrainian Nazi collaborator groups that helped perpetuate the Holocaust. And this is why I was talking about nationalist doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. Glory to Ukraine doesn't necessarily have to be a bad phrase, but it is continually used by Nazi groups. And so it is a Nazi phrase. Again, what I'm trying to show is that all of these people who we have found ourselves at the mercy of at all levels of government are okay utilizing white supremacist individuals and ideology to exact their ends on anyone. And so, like I spoke about in the video, they'll allow these white supremacists to come into our neighborhoods and become our police. In Chicago or in the state of Illinois, you don't even have to be a U.S. citizen to be a police officer anymore. What is going to happen when they finally start to accept Ukrainian refugees or any refugees that have anti-Black, anti-freedmen points of view? What does that mean? What are the wider implications of these type of actions? What is the point? If you're telling me that you're short on officers and that there's a lack of officers of Black people who want to be police officers, wouldn't you be better served if you really wanted to make a change and trying to figure out why that occurred and trying to counteract that, rather than taking people who are not even U.S. citizens and allowing them to become police, allowing them to carry guns and make arrests with whatever biases and prejudices they may have? It is important for us to understand how this all fits together for us. Okay? Because even though I spoke a lot about Nazism and Ukraine and Canada, we need to understand, one, from the first video, how our government is funding all this, allowing for $100 billion to be made available, incurring $275 billion in interest debt because the interest rates have increased, and potentially looking at accruing $1 trillion of debt per month to support neo-Nazis, to support Nazis in our name, and claiming to be in the name of spreading and stabilizing democracy around the world. I want to play a video. This will be, and it's going to be 3 videos and an article. We spoke about the Nord Stream and talked about some things about it. The Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, and the U.S. government did it. And there has been some pushback about, who actually did it. And there's a belief that the U.S. government wasn't behind it. How could they be behind it? Why would they have a reason? This is Russia. This is Putin's doing because he wanted to try to destabilize Europe. And this is why I spoke about too. It's from Seymour Hersh, how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline. You can read this article. I have to get access to his Substack. It was available when the article first dropped in February 2023. So he's paywalled it now. But I spoke in the video, and maybe I should have gone back and said, I don't know what I said. I don't know what ends this is for, because I don't know if they're trying to destabilize Europe. I don't know if they're trying to destabilize Germany. Like, I don't know what the point was, but I was correct. That was what they were trying to do. They want to destabilize Germany Because, like I said, there is an interest of the U.S. state. There is an interest in making sure that they have all the power. They're willing to sacrifice everything to make sure they have power. There is no expense spared to make sure that the U.S. can remain the singular world hegemon, even if that means sacrificing friends. Henry Kissinger told you, one of the most evil men in the 21st century or the 20th century, said, to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous. To be a friend is fatal. So here is a video from Matt Orfalea about who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Again, I talked to you about how the media, they speak in these phrases. They repeat these talking points and these words. In my opinion, it is so that they can hypnotize you, your subconscious, so that you believe what they are saying deep within yourself.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that?
I promise you we'll be able to do it.
Someone blew up Russia's Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, we'd have to conclude without the evidence that it's most likely
Russian sabotage on its own infrastructure.
It's a common sense matter.
I think it's Putin's way of sending a message.
What Putin is saying to us by blowing up his pipeline is, look, I can blow up a pipeline.
Everyone knows that Putin did this himself. It's the closest thing to a smoking gun without the direct proof.
Yeah, I think logic and common sense will tell you that
without the evidence,
Russia was behind the incident.
We can say it for sure.
Who sabotaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
The Russians.
I love the certainty and I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, there's exactly one country on that list of suspects, Brad, and Russia would be it.
It's hard to imagine others with a significant motive, but
we will bring an end to it.
Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
Who did it? What a mystery.
One way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
But it remains unclear who could have been behind the Nord Stream pipeline leaks.
Make explicitly clear to anyone involved with constructing this pipeline that the consequences of doing so are catastrophic.
Who would do such a thing like this? I mean,
that offers tremendous strategic opportunity.
We still don't know who caused damage to the natural gas pipelines.
U.S. Secretary of State warned against the pipeline.
The Nord Stream pipeline mystery continues.
U.S. says they'll do everything to stop the Nord Stream pipeline.
We do everything we can.
And I have no idea who is responsible.
Kill Nord Stream 2 now.
Put an end to it.
Use all the tools available
to stop the Nord Stream 2
and let it rust beneath the waves of the Baltic.
It's almost inconceivable to think that the U.S. would do it.
A member of European Parliament publicly thanked the U.S. for blowing up the pipelines.
This pipeline must be stopped.
Who would do that and why?
According to U.S. government think tank Rand Corp, the first step to weaken Russia is to stop Nord Stream 2.
So it's a real mystery.
Halt Nord Stream 2 to stop Russia.
Shut down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Stopping the Nord Stream.
Take out Nord Stream 2 forever.
Permanently.
Ending it permanently.
End it once and for all.
U.S. must take immediate steps to terminate Nord Stream.
Should cancel the Nord Stream pipeline.
Absolutely, we should cut it off.
We must stop this Nord Stream.
We have made clear to the Russians that pipeline is at risk if they move further into Ukraine.
We can't find anybody who'd be the obvious culprit in all of this.
When it comes to Nord Stream 2, the pipeline that would bring natural gas from Russia to Germany, it will not happen. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. And now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies.
I want to bring in former CIA Director John Brennan.
Russia is certainly the most likely suspect.
Russia is certainly the likeliest suspect. Russia is most likely behind this.
Russia is the likely cause of it.
Likelihood that Russia is behind the attacks.
Very likely. Russian.
Likely Russian.
It is likely that this is an act by Russia.
The most likely thing is in fact the most likely thing. Russia.
The most likely suspect at this point, according to many, is Russia.
I've heard people I trust saying that it's just probably Russia.
Vladimir Putin, the most likely. Russia is likely to blame.
I mean, that's totally something Putin would do and then go blame it on someone else.
Essentially a scenario of cutting off your nose to spite your face here.
Why would Russia bomb its own pipeline? It doesn't seem to make sense if you're thinking in a rational actor scenario, but
Experts agree that Russia is the key suspect.
Experts say Russia.
experts point the finger at Russia.
Experts pointing their finger at Russia.
European leaders are pointing the finger at Russia.
And all fingers pointing at Vladimir Putin.
Pointing the finger at Moscow.
Pointing the finger at
The
Russia.
Occam's razor points to Russia.
Most logical points to Russia.
German lawmakers point the finger at Russia. Spain points the finger at Russia.
All signs point to Russia.
Signs point to Russia, Russia, and Russia.
Still kind of seems to me like Occam's razor does still point to Russia's involvement.
Russia is a prime suspect.
Putin, the prime suspect.
This is a not so subtle message from the Russians.
Russian sabotage. Russian sabotage.
What's happening here is Russian sabotage.
Sabotage by the Russians.
I'm almost getting sick to my stomach, so I have to pause it. But I mean, do you see that? Everybody just repeat. And I was talking to a coworker today, good brother, and we were talking about consensus. And I was explaining to him that consensus nowadays is used to establish a truth. He was saying, "Well, isn't consensus used to kind of give everybody a starting point, the same starting point?" And I said, no, used to be. If we lived in a world where everybody was free and things operated at face value and everybody was on the up and up, yes, that would be what it was. But in the world we live in today, this rules-based international order, the consensus is used to establish the reality. Who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? That's the motto for America. It's not e pluribus unum. Who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? That's what Uncle Sam, that shirt, that picture, Uncle Sam saying, "I want you." That's what it should say on the bottom, not "I want you." It should say, "Who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes?" Because every day we see the truth, and every day they try to tell you something different. Don't piss on my back and tell me it's raining. That's well, I had a coach used to say that, a football coach. Don't piss on my back and tell me it's raining. And that's what happened to us every single day. Because these people, experts, who? This is something Putin would do. How do you know? Show me a picture you ever even in the same room with the guy, let alone that you have any idea the inner workings of his mind. This is something Putin would do. This all experts say. Experts say. Experts say. And again, I go back to the laptop. Experts said the laptop wasn't real. Got videos of his son smoking crack rocks. The president's son is on video smoking crack rocks. And everybody and we could see the guy. We could see his face. And they had us, I don't know if they wanted us to believe it was a deep fake or something, but they had a whole media apparatus saying, "Oh, that ain't real. That's inconsequential, even if it is real, but it ain't even real, so it don't matter."
The Russians.
Sabotaged by the Russians.
More stable rattle, more intimidation from the Russians.
Certainly is.
While NATO does not call out Russia by name for being behind the attack,
Looks like it could have had Russia behind it.
Looks like it was a Russian attack.
the attack is right out of Putin's playbook.
Putin's playbook. Putin's playbook.
Sabotage sounds very part of his playbook. It's essentially owned by the Russians and a Russian company. It'd be hard to protect against self-sabotage.
The assessment is Russia was behind it.
The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, I would bet, was a U.S. action.
What evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence.
Hey, Jeff, we got to stop there. They have to leave it there.
So that's Jeffrey Sachs from earlier, right? What evidence do you have now? When he says the U.S. did it, you want to see evidence. When you say Russia did it, well, experts say, name one. This is out of Putin's playbook. Show me the book. But when you say the U.S. did it, well, what's your evidence? Well, we got this sonar evidence. Oh, we got to go. You see what I'm saying?
Only Russia could be behind the Nord Stream pipeline leaks. Only one answer, Russia.
They did. And certainly the suspicions have got to be Russia who's doing this.
Got to be.
Obviously, Russia.
It's the obvious explanation that this was done by Russia.
It's pretty obvious this is a Russian sabotage operation.
And then you see Sagar from Breaking Points. Again, speaking of independent media, if the independent media is going to push the same bullshit line of the establishment media, of the mainstream, why waste your time watching it? The reason I have compiled all this evidence, all these articles, and all these videos, this is another video by Matt Orphalas, you can see. The reason I'm compiling all this stuff for people to consume is because I'm trying to give you things that I assume a lot of people haven't seen, or I'm trying to present it in a way that makes it more contextually relevant to your life. But if I'm gonna just get on here and say, well, yeah, whatever CNN say is true, go watch CNN. Go watch Fox. Jeez.
Russia says, oh, we had nothing to do with this, but come on.
It was probably Russia that blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Oh, I think it did. I'm 99% certain of it.
Everything that I'm reading and sensing is that
Russia did it.
Russian or Russian forces. So
Russia has done what it frequently does when it is responsible for something, which is make accusations that it was really someone else who did it.
Russian sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline marks a point of no return.
Poland's prime minister called this the next stage in Russia's war escalation.
Putin trying to incite an attack on Russia.
Putin is trying to coax NATO into this conflict.
The explosions that we saw in the Baltic with Nord Stream 1 and 2, that would be an escalation.
No, I'm serious. He's looking for an excuse to escalate.
Would be the latest excuse for Putin to escalate his attacks.
The pipeline leaks.
An important thing to realize, too, is you see Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and all these independent media all saying the same thing. They're all saying the same thing. Again, the establishment comes together to stabilize itself. It comes together to protect itself. You're not going to be able to negotiate with these people. You're not going to be able to infiltrate it from the inside. You see that when people voted in, Alex Cortez and Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. You're not going to be able to vote these people, to vote people in to change the system from the inside. It's not going to happen. The system isn't built to operate that way.
Leaks will change the course of this war.
This could be one of the most impactful global events of the year, if not of many years.
The response to this sabotage leads us down a very potential dark path, especially one that involves nuclear weapons.
NATO says it will retaliate for any attacks on the critical infrastructure of member countries.
The Nord Stream pipeline, if that is a Russian attack, does that count as an attack on a NATO nation?
Any deliberate attack on critical NATO infrastructure will be met with a firm and united response from NATO.
That could mark a new and serious escalation.
NATO may have to respond to this. So potentially, we are looking at NATO making some kind of pointed response other than a strongly worded statement to Russia for an attack on what is basically European infrastructure.
There was some optimism that maybe the war in Ukraine would be tamping down. Is there any optimism now?
I'm not optimistic about that.
The gas leak in the Nord Stream pipeline has fundamentally changed the nature of the war in Ukraine.
He seems to be laying the groundwork for the potential use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield. So maybe a week ago, we would have said there's a 10% chance. I think we're probably closer to 25% chance.
Certainly an alarming escalation there. Yeah.
I believe it was the Russians.
Fascinating.
It's like a religious expression for these people. It's not founded in truth. But here's Victoria Nuland. We talked about her last video. Here's her talking to, I believe it was going to be Senator Marco Rubio about the pipeline and its aftermath.
I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
Let me repeat that because it was quick.
I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
Now, when Joe Biden was speaking in that video, and he said, we'll get rid of this pipeline if something. And the lady says, how will you do that?
Interested in a solar powered generator?
He's standing next to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, and he's in Germany, I believe. And the woman asking him is a German reporter. So, first off, why are you happy the pipeline is destroyed? Why is the senator happy the pipeline is destroyed? If Russia did this as an act of sabotage, why would anybody in America be happy about this? That doesn't make sense. Because the converse of that is that they're unhappy that the pipeline is operational. So if you're happy that it's broken, you would be unhappy that it wasn't broken. Right? I want to show, this is a video of Jimmy Dore speaking at the United Nations Security Council concerning the, it's a really great video. It's 11 minutes. It is fairly long, but it really is a very powerful video speaking about
the 9,424th meeting of the Security Council is called
concerning
to order.
What is going on? And so I want you to hear it. I don't know why it took so long for it to pause.
The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Dirk Polman, journalist, and Mr. Jimmy Dore, political commentator. It is so decided. I now give the floor to Mr. Jimmy Dore.
Greetings, Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council. I'm here to speak today about the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline that took place 1 year ago on September 26, 2022. 4 explosions ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that carried natural gas from Russia to Europe. It was the biggest act of industrial sabotage in human history, severing the main artery for energy from Russia to Germany, cheap energy that was critical to maintaining Germany's industrial base. We have heard every cockamamie and ridiculous theory on how this happened. Now, you don't need to be a genius investigative reporter to figure out who is the culprit of the Nord Stream attack. Incredibly, most Western news outlets ignore the fact that the President of the United States, Joe Biden himself, announced on February 9th, 2022, that he would in fact attack the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, saying, and I quote, "If Russia invades Ukraine, tanks crossing the border again, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We will bring an end to it. I promise you, we will be able to do it." Even with that pre-admission of guilt from the President of the United States, most of the Western press remained baffled as to who could have pulled off the greatest act of eco-terrorism in history. But luckily, we don't have to rely on my interpretation of President Biden's clear threat to attack the pipelines. We actually have Seymour Hersh, a genius investigative reporter with impeccable reputation and credentials, who reported that in June of 2022, United States Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized summer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning.
Okay, so just hearing all that information. And there's no outrage. Again, pointing to how we as freedmen have pushed back against the U.S. empire at every turn. And these countries are even willing to sacrifice themselves. Germany's economy has now gone from the envy of the world to the worst performing industrialized economy in the world. And this is why. This is the reason why. They had access to cheap natural gas from Russia. The U.S. blew up the pipeline, and now they screwed. And ain't nobody said, you know what? This ain't right. We're not going to take it. We're not going to stand for it.
And like all criminals, the perpetrators could not contain their elation over committing the crime. Shortly after the attack, many high-ranking U.S. officials could not help but brag about their achievements and expressed multiple times how they were proud of being able to put an end to the pipelines. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland said, "I am, and I think the administration is, very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea." The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken called it a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy. You have to be a paid liar to not acknowledge the hand of the United States in carrying out these attacks. Not only did President Biden declare he would do this, but high-ranking U.S. officials have said similar things for years. We can look to 2014 when former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice stated that over the long run, you simply want to change the structure of energy dependence. You want to depend more on North American energy platforms, which is what this is really all about. An economic war between the West and Russia in order to fill the pockets of rapacious capitalists who actually pull the strings of the U.S. government and dictate foreign policy. So let's pull back and take a look at the context in which this pipeline bombing occurred, shall we? It's all happening under the guise of defending Ukraine from an unprovoked Russian invasion. But of course, that's only true if you start the story of the Ukraine war.
I'll link to this again in the description. I do want to try to wrap this up, so I'm not going to try to drag this out unnecessarily. But so there's just a couple things I want to talk about. A couple more things. So Ukraine had to fire 6 deputy defense ministers because of corruption. There is a photos going around online of a French villa. Right. Here, let me see. I'll show you that first. There's a French villa, and it's photos of the daughter of the Ukrainian defense minister. And they say that she just purchased this villa for like $9 million or something. And Alexei Reznikov is his name. Okay, because a lot of the money is it's corrupt. The money that they're giving to Ukraine is just being given to it's being given to different people in the government, right? Like they say, the president Zelensky is worth like $300 million. He's got homes in Miami and all over everywhere. And so this is AFP fact check. They say, it's not really, this isn't true. This house is still on the market. It's still for sale. That wasn't accurate. He didn't buy this for his daughter or whatever. This is the article. So it says the house has 8 bedrooms and costs $11.75 million, not 7, as the Post claims. So it's not, whatever. Okay. So I guess that's him and his daughter. Okay. So I'm going to show you this other article that I mentioned ahead of this because they say it was fake. No, that was false. That wasn't true. But here it says, Ukraine fires 6 deputy defense ministers as heavy fighting continues in the east. It says, 6 Ukrainian deputy defense ministers were fired Monday following the dismissal 2 weeks ago of Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov. What is this guy? Man, he looks filthy. Jesus. He looks like, wow. Man, bro, that look in his eyes, man. I do not envy him. The dismissal 2 weeks ago, so this is September 18, 2023, of Minister Alexei Reznikov in a corruption scandal, officials said. Russia claims. So the defense minister was fired for corruption, and 6 deputy ministers were fired for corruption. But I guess technically, what? That wasn't the house. That house wasn't really the house that they were saying it was. So you know what I'm saying? Either way. So this is from August 2023. So the one where he got fired was from September. So I think there's a bit of a lag between the evidence you got and what you see. Okay, here's my last. This should be my last article. But with this article, I do want to, a couple of little small clips in there that I'm going to be talking about concerning some members of the squad. So it says, as conservatives ramp up opposition to Ukraine war, Dems dodge the gray zone. This is from the gray zone. Is Liam Cosgrove, September 29th, 2023. As the budget showdown looms in Congress. Sorry, let me fix that. As the budget shutdown looms in Congress, MAGA Republicans are alone in challenging the vast quantities of American weapons and cash being funneled to Kiev. Marjorie Taylor Greene warning the gray zone that increasing escalation could turn the proxy war into a, quote, potential nuclear conflict, end quote. When approached for comment, progressive members of the squad dodged our questions. So let's see. I just want to show you the clips. Let's see. So New York Congressman Jamal Bowman refused to condemn the ceremony, talking about the Nazi, and he's black, you know, the Nazi in Canada's parliament. Here's what he says about it all. It says, while conservatives, so the title of the article says, Rep Bowman was among the squad members who refused to answer Cosgrove IV's question about military aid to Kiev amid Canada's Nazi Gate scandal. So here you go. That's the face. This is the face, the demeanor, the character of an individual who's compromised. And maybe compromise is too lenient of a term. But this is what I'm like. I've gotten to the point where electoral politics for me is like, you know, I don't see how I could even convince somebody, how I can in good conscience try to convince somebody to participate in electoral politics. Oh, you haven't seen it. You can't see it. Let me see. Because I don't think you can see the video. You see it, but you don't hear it. So let's see. So let me rewind it.
The Ukrainian president giving a standing ovation to an actual Nazi war veteran. Doesn't concern you. Are you concerned about Zelensky
No
giving
comment.
a standing
Turn off the video.
ovation?
Turn off the video.
A standing ovation to a Nazi last Friday. Does that not concern you?
Turn off the video, man. I actually turn you, so you don't listen. So if I say turn off the video, you don't respect that.
Well, I'm not. I mean,
I'm good,
I'm
man.
not required
I'm not talking
to.
to you. Okay, go ahead, man. Do your thing.
But you're not concerned about us giving weapons to Nazis that are fighting in Ukraine, and then also the Ukrainian president giving a standing ovation to an actual Nazi war veteran. Doesn't concern you. Why won't you answer?
Where are you?
It's a simple question. Does it concern you?
What's up, sir? How you doing, brother? All right.
Doesn't concern you at all, I guess.
I just came down the steps, so I don't know.
Again, you couldn't see it, so I had to play it here. I don't know why it opened up in a new tab, but I mean, this is the way they act. This is the way he acts. Like he acts like I don't know what part of New York he's from, so I don't want to start naming boroughs, but like you're a member of Congress, bro. You're not at home. He used to be a principal. You're not in a school somewhere. Like you don't have that level of authority with the average citizenship. You're supposed to be working for the people, at least the constituents in your district. But you are an employee of the American people. Oh, you're not gonna I don't want to talk to you. You're not gonna we're not friends. This is not a this isn't a congenial interaction we're having. I'm asking you questions as a journalist. I'm asking you specific questions as a journalist with specific needs. Now here's your girl, AOC. We know she don't like Nazis and she don't like fascists and all this shit. So let's see what she say.
I catch you at the late.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Thank you. Quick comment for the Gray Zone. Were you concerned last week when President Zelensky in Ukraine gave a standing ovation for an ex-Nazi war veteran in Canada?
Well, I mean, I think any situation like that would be out and go.
It is concerning.
Thank you.
And I'm not going to even say, they're cowards because that would be like a disservice to cowards. But this is who they want to stand up and talk tough and act like either you're ready to fight or we just got to stop engaging with this. We got to stop engaging with this. Honestly, it's these are the allies you have, and it's a shell game because now the conservatives, they don't want to go to war with Ukraine, but if it was China, then most of them would be cool with it. And so you're still stuck in a shell game because on either end of the political spectrum, they're both full of shit. You don't have an option. You don't have a legitimate choice, right? There's nobody legitimately fighting your interests. Let me show. This is the Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. This is some of our t-shirt merchandise. We will be making them available soon. It says "Got Reparations" on it. The Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. You can look us up, Google us. I'm not sure what the web address is, but look it up. The Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. So these will be available for purchase. The money goes toward donations to help the organization with organizing events and lobbying and things like that on behalf of freedmen in Michigan. But we got to be mindful of what works for us and works for our community and works for us in our daily lives. And we can't allow the news, the politicians, or anybody to influence what you see and experience. The U.S. works with Nazis. The West works with Nazis. They don't have a problem with. So when you hear the white supremacists infiltrate law enforcement, so when you hear all these different people, the president, the vice president, Obama, anybody, when they talk about all this shit about white supremacy, Nazi, any of that stuff, it's just buzzword. It don't mean nothing. It don't mean nothing. They don't have values. They don't have. So here's the link to the Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan, freedmenmi.org. But they don't have any morals. They don't have any values, nothing. I'll leave it up. But they don't have any values. You know, there's nothing is sacred. Nothing has a meaning only as much as it is useful to the empire. We have to understand that in our negotiation and I say negotiation, I use that term loosely, but we have to understand that in our struggle for equality and freedom and justice, that you are trying to negotiate with an evil. The level of corruption here in this country, you know, it cannot be overstated. Whatever you could think of it, the most extreme, vile, evil, it can't be overstated. This is literally in its most representative, the belly of the beast. This is where we are. This is the conditions of our existence in this country, is the belly of the beast. We are at the bottom of it, and we have been fighting a struggle continually. 400 years in this place, in some capacity. And we've gotten to a point now where the people in charge do not even find it necessary to conceal their evil intentions. They don't care. It don't even faze them. We have to be mindful of this. We have to wake up, try to wake up your family, your community. We have to try to find a way to break free from this. And importantly, understand that we are intentionally held back. We are intentionally held down, repressed, oppressed, suppressed, because they understand that if we had anything like stability, we would come for what was ours. If we had anything like, you know, sensible, we would build something beneficial for us. That is why our community has been pumped full of drugs and guns and negativity, because they understand that that is necessary to keep us in a retarded state. So when you see your brother, your sister on the street, out in public, and you frustrated because it seems like they just don't understand, when your community seems like it's falling apart around you, keep in mind on your fight to improve everything who the real enemy, who the real cause is, and who is the victim. However you have managed to find your way out of your situation, however you have managed to find your way out of your thinking that allows you to see more clearly, to want to find knowledge, to want to attain knowledge, understand that it is outside of your control in a lot of ways, right? We don't know what is in us that makes us quest for deeper, but have patience and try to share as best you can what you have with your brothers and your sisters so that we might all be free. These people are vicious. Nothing is sacred. With that, I think I will, close down this episode, part 2. I think I've kind of gone as thoroughly in depth with this topic as I think is necessary. Still trying to get people to see the connection between how this affects us here at home. When you have a country who is willing to force their own allies to suffer in the name of greed and power, when you have a country who's willing to sacrifice the lives of people thousands of miles away, what more will they do for you? What more evil will they do to you? You know, we're at the mercy of these people. There is no higher, greater international body or organization who can protect us. You are in the belly of the beast. You are in it. We have been in it. Continue to fight, but we must refine our tactics. We must understand the difference in ways that this game needs to be played now. So, you know, I'm hoping that we can get back into doing this a little more frequently. Get my brothers to have their schedule cleared up, and let's kind of see where things go from here. I'm excited about it, and I'm optimistic about it, because I think we all contribute something important to the discussion and the dissection of the information. And I want to continue to try to be as positive of a light as I can be. Again, the Got Reparations t-shirt from the Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. The Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan is a 501c4, or in the process of becoming a 501c4 organization. We are attempting to engage in the political space in Detroit, but all around Michigan, and interact with other groups around the country who are interested in pursuing an agenda of reparations and equality and freedom for the descendants of freedom in this country. So again, appreciate you. From all my brothers who aren't here with me right now, but they're here with me in spirit and in my mind, I appreciate you spending time with us. We hope to be back soon with some new information for you. So with that, I'll say peace and reparations.